Has your great-grandfather or great-grandmother ever sat you down to tell you stories about the world before the 20th century? Or did they just sit in absolute silence staring out the window? It is not because their memories naturally faded. It is because they were brutally and systematically silenced. Deep beneath the busy streets of Washington District of Columbia, locked away in the cold basement of the Library of Congress, there is a hidden filing cabinet that holds the exact voices of dead Americans. These are not audio recordings, but thousands upon thousands of pages of fading, typewritten manuscripts. They are the last surviving testimonies collected by government writers during the Works Progress Administration Project, a massive government operation conducted meticulously between the years 1936 and 1940. The government deployed highly trained agents into the quiet homes of ordinary, elderly citizens across 24 different states with one chilling and urgent instruction: get their stories before they are gone forever. They successfully collected 2,900 detailed life histories. They documented the raw, unfiltered memories of the very last generation who actually saw the old world with their own eyes before everything was systematically erased from human consciousness. But then something absolutely terrifying happened. Without any warning or logical explanation, the entire project was abruptly defunded and completely shut down in the year 1939. Those 2,900 crucial interviews were suddenly boxed up, shoved into the dark, and strictly banned from public access for nearly 40 years. Why? What exactly did those elderly Americans tell the government writers that was considered so incredibly dangerous? What did they remember about the world before the Great Historical Reset? The history you read in your textbooks is not the objective truth. It is not a factual record of human progress. It is simply a fabricated inventory written by the architects of the New World after an entire magnificent civilization was intentionally vaporized. Every single American child is taught the exact same comforting story about the Great Chicago Fire of the year 1871. They tell you a simple tale about a cow kicking over a lantern in a wooden barn and the wind doing the rest. But what the educational system deliberately hides from you is what happened on that exact same night, at the exact same hour, across 3 entirely different states simultaneously. While Chicago burned, a massive, unnatural firestorm completely consumed the entire town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin, in approximately one single hour. Between 2,000 and 2,500 people perished instantly, making it the deadliest recorded wildfire in American history. And on that very same night, Holland, Michigan, burned to the ground. Manistee, Michigan, burned to the ground. Port Huron was threatened. Across 2,500,000 acres of the upper Midwest, fires erupted simultaneously out of absolutely nowhere. The official explanation aggressively blames drought and a cold front with high winds. Reasonable, perhaps, until you look at the horrifying eyewitness accounts from the survivors. Reverend Peter Pernin, a parish priest who barely survived by submerging his body in the Peshtigo River, published his chilling account in the year 1874. He described a terrifying phenomenon that does not match any normal, natural wildfire behavior in recorded science. The available oxygen was consumed so incredibly rapidly that people who showed absolutely no physical burns were found completely deceased, as if the air itself had been weaponized against them. The heat was so unimaginably intense that people crossing open ground simply burst into flames without even being touched by visible fire. Witnesses in Chicago reported strange, bright blue flames burning inexplicably in brick basements. This color is consistent with unusual chemical combustion, not burning wood. Therefore, this fire created its own devastating weather system, a vortex of superheated wind that behaved less like a forest fire and far more like a coordinated detonation expanding from a central point outward. The sky turned blood red. The elderly people interviewed by the government writers in the decade of the 1930s were young children on that exact night. An 80-year-old would have been 13 in the year 1871, old enough to watch the world burn, old enough to be told by their terrified parents exactly what happened. But those specific memories contradict the official record. Therefore, they had to be silenced. This was not a tragic natural disaster. It was a calculated, simultaneous, and geographic purge to wipe the slate clean. Once you deliberately burn down the magnificent old world, you desperately need new, compliant citizens to blindly build the new matrix. But these new citizens cannot have any memory of what actually came before. They must be a completely blank slate. Between the years 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were aggressively loaded onto massive steam trains in crowded cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. They were systematically transported far away to rural, isolated farming communities across the American Midwest and the Wild West. We are constantly told this was a benevolent charity program known as the Orphan Train movement. But the horrifying reality is that less than half of these displaced children were actually orphans. The rest were the completely innocent children of poor immigrants, children of families who simply could not afford to fight the powerful institutions that violently ripped their sons and daughters away from them. At specific stops along the railway routes, these terrified children were paraded on wooden platforms and displayed in what contemporary historical accounts describe as literal auction-like events. Farming families coldly inspected them, evaluated their physical size and apparent health, and selected the ones they wanted for hard, brutal labor. But here is the most sinister, chilling detail that modern historians completely gloss over. Upon arrival in their strange new communities, the older children were strongly encouraged, and often forcefully required under threat of punishment, to break all contact with their past lives. Their original family names were completely erased. Their true geographic origins were deliberately not recorded, or intentionally recorded incorrectly. They were strictly forbidden from speaking their native languages or ever mentioning their real parents. Many of these manipulated children grew up and could not even tell their own grandchildren where they genuinely came from because they simply did not know anymore. 250,000 Americans whose fundamental identities were functionally severed by institutional design. An entire massive generation disconnected from their own history, their own bloodlines, specifically to create a massive gap in human memory. Statistically speaking, 1 in every 4 modern Americans has a direct blood connection to this massive, state-sponsored human trafficking operation. The very blood pumping in your veins right now might belong to a family line that was completely fabricated from nothing, a lineage created specifically to hide the undeniable existence of a highly advanced past. Look incredibly closely at the World Columbian Exposition that took place in Chicago in the year 1893. Official, mainstream history aggressively tells us that 27 million visitors walked through over 200 massive, breathtaking neoclassical structures spread across 630 acres of Jackson Park. They called it the beautiful White City. We are blindly expected to believe, without asking a single question, that these enormous, impossible domes, which rivaled the most ancient European cathedrals, featuring massive columns and sculptural details as precise as ancient Rome, were fully constructed in under 2 short years. And how were they supposedly built? We are told they used a flimsy, temporary mixture of plaster, cement and jute fiber simply slapped onto wooden frames. We are told they used basic horse-drawn equipment, primitive hand tools and raw manual labor. There were absolutely no massive modern cranes. There was no advanced modern construction technology. 200 gigantic, flawless buildings on 630 acres in under 24 months. And then comes the most illogical, insulting part of the entire official narrative. After a mere 6 months of public display, nearly every single magnificent structure was completely demolished, deliberately burned, or intentionally wiped off the map. Why on earth would anyone spend that much immense, impossible effort to build a literal, functioning wonder of the world just to tear it down immediately into dust? The elderly Americans interviewed in the decade of the 1930s actually walked through those exact buildings when they were young adults or children. They saw something that looked absolutely nothing like the temporary, primitive America being constructed around them. It felt like a magnificent, ancient city that had always been sitting right there. Unless, of course, they did not actually build the White City at all. What if they simply excavated it, cleaned it up, displayed it as a temporary fair to the distracted public, and then completely destroyed the physical evidence to make the architectural timeline artificially fit the new, manipulated historical narrative? But to completely erase a highly advanced civilization, you must also completely erase the specific identities of the millions of people who lived through the Great Transition. This brings us to the devastating climax of this massive historical cover-up. In the year 1890, the United States government conducted the most comprehensive census in its entire history. For the very first time, the government recorded immigration status, home ownership, and unprecedented personal details of 62,900,000 Americans. This was the exact generation that vividly remembered what America actually looked like before the mysterious fires and the forced orphan trains. Curious, it was also the very first census where the government suddenly broke a century of strict protocol and did not require backup copies to be safely stored in local county courthouses. The entire census of 1890 existed in only one single, highly vulnerable location, the dark basement of the Commerce Department building in Washington District of Columbia. On January 10, 1921, a highly suspicious fire broke out in that exact basement. A massive portion of the irreplaceable records was destroyed outright or suffered severe water and smoke damage. But what the government did next is even more disturbing than the fire itself. For 12 long years, they did absolutely nothing to restore or copy the surviving documents. Then a chilling, calculated sequence of bureaucratic events unfolded. In December 1932, the remaining records were quietly scheduled for permanent destruction. Congress officially authorized this total destruction on February 21, 1933. The very next day, February 22, 1933, President Herbert Hoover laid the massive cornerstone for the brand new National Archives building, a state-of-the-art fireproof facility specifically designed to protect important historical documents from exactly this kind of disaster. They intentionally destroyed the last written proof of the old world exactly one single day before building the vault that would have saved it forever. When you finally connect all of these supposedly isolated historical dots, the massive, horrifying timeline becomes undeniably clear and absolutely terrifying. First, in the year 1871, they orchestrated the simultaneous, systematic burning of the old world across multiple states in a single, devastating night. They needed to clear the land of the magnificent structures that did not fit their primitive narrative. Then, in the year 1890, they carefully recorded the exact identities, locations, and personal details of every single surviving human being who actually witnessed the brutal transition. They needed to know exactly who was still alive and who still remembered the truth. In the year 1893, they deliberately showcased the breathtaking, impossible architectural remnants of the previous, highly advanced civilization at the World Columbian Exposition. They flaunted it in front of millions, only to immediately and senselessly demolish those 200 magnificent structures into dust so absolutely no physical, undeniable evidence remained for future generations to study. By the year 1929, they had successfully completed the systematic brainwashing, relocation, and renaming of 250,000 displaced, innocent children. They scattered them across the continent, successfully ensuring that the entirely new generation had absolutely no memory, no connection, and no understanding of their true historical origins. In the year 1933, they purposely burned and shredded the last remaining comprehensive census records that could have legally proven who these displaced people really were, and where they actually came from. And finally, in the year 1939, they permanently and ruthlessly silenced the desperate government writers who were furiously trying to document the last remaining first-hand memories of the elderly citizens before they passed away. The elderly people interviewed in the decade of the 1930s were not crazy, they were not senile, and they were not confused. They were the absolute last human chain connecting us to the real, magnificent history of this planet. When they desperately tried to tell their own brainwashed grandchildren about the impossible buildings that touched the sky, the simultaneous unnatural fires that melted brick, and the massive steam trains full of nameless, crying orphans, those grandchildren simply nodded politely, smiled condescendingly, and quickly changed the subject. The new, state-sponsored educational system had already successfully trained the younger, modern generation to fundamentally believe that their own grandparents were just confused, outdated, and remembering things entirely wrong. In the America of the decade of the 1950s, the government-approved textbooks, the fabricated encyclopedias, and the manufactured academic consensus always won the argument. The raw, terrifying truth was comfortably buried under layers of bureaucratic paperwork, historical revisionism, and societal mockery. Think about the immense psychological trauma inflicted upon an entire society that was forcefully severed from its own roots. We are a species wandering in the dark, suffering from a collective, engineered amnesia. The architects of this deception understood that if you control the past, you completely control the future. By wiping our slate clean, they made us entirely dependent on their systems, their institutions, and their carefully curated versions of reality. Every time you feel that strange, unexplainable intuition that something about our world does not make sense, that is the suppressed, genetic memory of the old world fighting to break through the programming. So I want you to stop and look very, very closely at the world around you right now. Look at the foundation of the house you are currently living in. Look at the massive, inexplicable stone buildings in your own downtown area that supposedly took men with horses only a few months to build. Look deep into your own family tree, into the strange, unexplained gaps in your own ancestry where the records mysteriously disappear. If the entire last 150 years of human history is nothing more than a carefully constructed, bureaucratic lie designed to keep you docile and ignorant, then who are we really? Are we the proud inheritors of a natural human evolution, or are we simply the captive descendants of a conquered, lobotomized species living in a fabricated historical matrix? And more importantly, if they were willing to go to such extreme lengths to completely erase the immediate past, what else are they hiding from us right now, in this very moment? The absolute truth is still sitting in that dark, cold filing cabinet deep beneath Washington District of Columbia, waiting for someone brave enough, crazy enough, and relentless enough to finally read it and expose the greatest crime ever committed against human consciousness. Let me know what you genuinely think about this massive historical cover-up in the comments below. Do you believe your own family history has been manipulated and rewritten? Hit the subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers, and make absolutely sure you ring the notification bell, because we are just beginning to scratch the surface of the greatest, most terrifying deception in human history. Until next time, do not trust the official narrative, do not blindly accept what you are told, and always, always question everything. You think the massive structures demolished in 1893 were the end of it? No, we have only been talking about America. In the next video, I will take you across the ocean to a massive continent that existed on every single map before the 19th century, but completely vanished without a trace, an entire empire completely erased from human consciousness. Do not forget to subscribe, because the next truth will make you question your own reality.